Hello everyone, my name is Katie and welcome back to my channel. Today is time to do the August wrap-up. August was a crazy reading month for me. I mean, I read 17 books. I think that's the most I've ever read in a month. It was crazy. The reason I read so much is we had Booktubeathon where I read 7 books in a week, and then after that I read the entirety of the Throne of Glass series in 2 weeks because I could not stop reading those books. I was addicted. And then after that I just continued on reading in my regular way and just it was crazy. I don't know if I'm ever gonna have as good of a month for reading as August was, but since there are a lot of books, let's just dive right into the books and what I thought about them. The first book that I read in August to kick off Booktubeathon is They Both Die at the End. I will put a link up in the corner to the vlog where you can see that I read this book in case you're interested for my live react. In a near distant future, a company will call you on your last day to let you know that you have 24 hours to live before you die. Rufus and Mateo are both teenagers that get their call from Deathcast and decide to make a last friend using an app that matches people on their death day with each other, and what ensues is a heartbreaking tale of friendship and learning to be your true self. Oh man, this book, 5 stars. This is my first ever Adam Silvera read. I got this book at BookCon. My friends went and met Adam Silvera and they were kind enough to get a copy for me, and it's signed, which is super cool. So this story is told in a few different perspectives, but mostly dual perspectives between Rufus and Mateo. I really like that even though these boys are both similar, that they each really had, you know, it could be easy for maybe the voices to become similar since they struggle with similar things, but Adam Silvera does a really good job of keeping their voices very distinct. Like Mateo is more shy and reserved, and you can tell in the way that he speaks and thinks in his sections, whereas like Rufus is a little bit more outgoing and he really draws Mateo out of his shell over the course of the 24 hours that they are together, and it is just beautiful and moving. And I was so sad when I finished this book. I just like couldn't believe, but I mean that's literally what I signed up for when I picked up a book called They Both Die at the End. But I just think this story is so moving, and it really does bring across the point of like what it means to live life to the fullest and be your truest self. Another thing that I really liked is that since this takes place in the near distant future, it's basically kind of like the same thing as today's world, but we just have this company that calls you on your last day, and there's a lot of different businesses that pop up around this fact. And what's cool is that Rufus like has an Instagram that he posts to like throughout the day, and you can go on Instagram and you can search it and you can see the pictures from the book, and I'm pretty sure like Adam Silvera probably posted it because it's like on the day that this book takes place, which was before the day that it was published. All these like photos were published, and I love like when authors do just like little things like that that just make the story that much more real. Even though the course of the story only takes place over 24 hours, the character arcs were still really believable, and even though it was insta-love, it just makes sense in this setting because like they know that they're gonna die, so they're just trying to experience as much as they can in the short amount of time that they are given. And it was just heartbreakingly beautiful. Like I could go on and on, but if you want to cry, pick up this book. Like I knew it was gonna hurt picking it up, but like I was still surprised by how much it hurt. The next book I read is For Everyone by Jason Reynolds. I'll put a picture up because I don't have the physical copy because I gave it to my sister, and it's actually a poem about being courageous, and it was a really quick read. I read it in about 20 minutes. I'm actually refraining from giving this one a rating because it was so short. I felt like I didn't even spend enough time with the material to give it a good rating, and I do want to go back and look up audio of it, whether it's like an audiobook or like if he gave a speech with the poem or something like that. Like I want to find that and listen to it because I feel like it's just going to be that much more powerful that way. I think with poetry, a lot of the times the nuances of it come across in the way that the phrases are shaped and melody of the words as they are spoken, and I think that sometimes you lose that when you're just reading it, and especially someone like me where I'm a very quick reader. I think with poetry you need time to absorb it, and I did not really take that time while I was reading it, so I'm refraining from giving it a rating, but I did enjoy it and I thought it was very inspirational. So next book is Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertelli. I have heard about it for so long, and the movie came out in February and I just never got around to it, and I'm so mad at myself that I didn't read it sooner because it is just amazing. This book follows Simon, who is a not so openly gay teenager who starts an email relationship with Blue, an anonymous teenager at his school who's also closeted. When their email conversation falls into the wrong hands, Simon is blackmailed and his life gets turned upside down. So I ended up giving this book 5 stars, and I saw the movie right after I read it and I absolutely loved it. I thought that the things that happened were very accurate to high school, because sometimes novels that take place in high school, it's, you know, like it's not really what high school is like, but I thought that this was pretty spot on with just like the way that all the different teenagers were acting and the things that were going on. And I also loved the characters. I loved Simon. I loved the relationship between him and his family and his friends, and I thought that dynamic was very well portrayed. But also, I was not expecting this book to be so emotional. I thought it was going to be like light and fluffy and cute, and there were some things that happened in here that like really pulled at the heartstrings, and I was touched. Just makes me happy to think about it. If you're considering picking this book up and you're not sure, like, just do it. It's amazing. Next up, I read Every Heart a Doorway by Senan McGuire. This is actually a novella, so it's pretty short, and the first one in her Wayward Children series. Children fall through doors all the time, but what happens when they come back to the real world? Others may think they're crazy or won't believe them for their experiences, and they wind up at Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, where the children that come back from other worlds can work through their experiences together. We follow Nancy, who comes back from an underworld, and her arrival at the school marks a change in a dark direction for the children. I gave this book 4 stars. I really thought that it did a lot in a short amount of pages, because this is a novella, but there was just a lot of layered world building because we are in the real world, but each child has like a different type of door they went through to a different type of world. So there were a lot of foundations laid for different kinds of worlds that can be explored in future novels. I thought the whole thing was like very weird and whimsical and fun. It definitely gave me some Alice in Wonderland vibes, and it also like has really a lot of representation and stuff like that, which is not something I was expecting, so I was pleasantly surprised. And there was also an unexpected mystery, which I again was not expecting, but I really liked. And I think the important thing with this book is it seems like it talks a lot about identity, and these worlds are almost kind of like a metaphor for a place where these children can go free of judgment of our world, and they can be their true selves. And I think when they come back to the real world, they lose that sense of self that they gained in this world that allowed them to be who they are, and they have to come to this home to cope with it. I just thought that that was a really kind of like beautiful metaphor, and also just a really good exploration of identity. Then as a follow-up to that, the next book I read is Down Among the Sticks and Bones by Senan McGuire. This follows Jack and Jill, who were 2 of my favorite characters from the original novel, and this is actually a prequel. So this takes place before Jack and Jill come to Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children. They are basically twins that are forced into distinct roles by their unfeeling parents, and they go through a door and they wind up in the moors, which is a very, very creepy world. It's like a very dark and mysterious English countryside type setting, and there's a town ruled by a vampire overlord, and we also have a mad scientist, and Jack and Jill in this world are free to be who they want to be instead of who their parents force them to be. I really enjoyed getting to hear more about their backstory. I think that Jack was one of my favorite characters. She was so cool, and just like she was a scientist. The moors was a really, really fun setting. Like I kind of want more of the moors because it was creepy, it was cool, there was vampires, mad scientists. Like what more can I say? Like if you're thinking of picking up this book, I would definitely save it for fall. It was very spooky read. Like I would almost want to read this like on Halloween or something. It was spooky and fun, and I ended up giving it 4.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read as part of Booktubeathon is City of Glass by Cassandra Clare. This is part of an ongoing buddy read that I have with my best friend Melissa. To give some background, if you are new here, if you have been here before, you've probably heard this 10 million times, but it's fine. Melissa and I originally read these books in high school together when we were 16, and now we are adults, and we've decided to do a whole reread of The Mortal Instruments and Infernal Devices and all that good stuff because we want to get into the dark artifices, and you know, we kind of forgot everything that happened. So this is the 3rd book in first half of the Mortal Instruments series. It kind of was posed that this was the original trilogy, then she came out with the Infernal Devices, and then she was like, surprise, and wrote a 2nd trilogy in the Mortal Instruments. To give you just the briefest of summaries on the Mortal Instruments, because if you've been around, you've probably heard of them before, but Clary Frey is a seemingly normal 15-year-old girl who gets thrown into the world of shadow hunters, which are humans with angel blood that hunt demons, and she's thrown into the shadow world, into the down world. There's werewolves, vampires, demons, angels, you name it, they got it. And this is the conclusion to the first trilogy. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I think it was the best book in the Mortal Instruments original trilogy by a landslide. The first two books definitely have their issues, and I think it's because of how long ago they were published. I think the standards for YA are not what they are now. The romance in the first two books is like very cringy, but yet I still really enjoy these books. It's a giant nostalgia factor for me. If I hadn't read them when I was younger, I don't know how I would feel just reading them for the first time now. But I think also the appeal of these series is that there's just so many books and just a lot of opportunities to immerse yourself in this world, and it's cool because it's like our world but with cool stuff, and I think that's the appeal for it for a lot of people. And there's like also like fun side books and stuff like that, so it's just like a really fun thing. And I think once you get past the first like two books, the rest of Cassandra Clare's works, her writing just like improves a lot. Like the plots are just not as cringy as they are in the first two, and I mean a little bit in this book too. Like the romances are better. Like I just think that you do need these books as an introduction, but once you get past them, it just gets like phenomenally better, and that's really where people have like this love of this series. So yeah, I gave this one 5 out of 5 stars. The other two I think I gave City of Bones 4 stars, and I gave City of Ashes, maybe I gave it 4 stars, but I really should give it like 3 or 3.5 stars, because the more that I sit on that book and I think about it, the more I want to lower my rating. I also think that one of the reasons that this book is good is there's a change of scenery. We go from being set in modern day New York City to Alicante, which is the Shadowhunters' home country. So there's like a lot of different world building, and you get a little bit more of the politics because now we're in the capital. There was a new villain that was introduced, and I loved his character. He was so shady. I love a good shady bitch, you know? And also just like because this was the conclusion, it just felt much better paced than the other two, and it just felt like the stakes were actually higher this time. So it was just really action packed towards the end, and I just thought that, you know, getting through the first two books, if they were like a little bit cringier, like the payoff is worth it for this book and in the subsequent series, which as I go along continuing to read the series, I will definitely let you guys know my thoughts. And you can check out my June wrap up for my thoughts on City of Bones and my July wrap up for my thoughts on City of Ashes. So the last book that I read for Booktubeathon is also the first book in the Throne of Glass series, and that is The Assassin's Blade. And following this one, I read the whole series, so I'll just go through each of the books. Throne of Glass, Crown of Midnight, Heir of Fire, Queen of Shadows, Empire of Storms, and finally Tower of Dawn. So I do recommend reading The Assassin's Blade before the other books because I think you just get a better understanding of Celaena's character. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the series and then a brief overview of my thoughts on the series as a whole, and as it gets closer to the release of Kingdom of Ash, I want to do a whole video talking about each book in depth. Kind of guess like a little mini book review for each book, so definitely be on the lookout for that as it gets closer to Kingdom of Ash. Throne of Glass follows Celaena Sardathian, the Empire's most ruthless assassin who's fresh off of a year as a slave in the salt mines of Endovier. She is brought to the castle to compete with other criminals and become the king's champion, aka the official assassin of the Empire. However, something evil lurks in the castle and starts killing off competitors one by one, and Celaena's quest for freedom becomes a fight for survival. Whew, okay, every book in the series gets a 5 stars from me. I am obsessed. Like, this is one of my new all-time favorite series. I absolutely love it. I just don't even know how to express. I think the beauty in the series is that each book builds so that the world building is very slow. You're not like thrust into this world unprepared with some other fantasy novels that I've seen. Each element of the character and of Celaena's arc as a person and the cast of characters gets layered in slowly and slowly so that the story just kind of like gains momentum as it goes along, and I think the pacing is beautiful. One of the things that Sarah J Maas really succeeds at is emotional arcs for each of her characters, and just the transformations and the journeys that they all go through are just so good, and it has this fantasy backdrop, and the series is just, it's amazing. Like, I don't know what else to say. I love it. I will scream from the rooftops. I love it. I'm a Throne of Glass fangirl now, and I need Kingdom of Ash, and I don't know how I'm gonna survive because it's 992 pages and then it's over. But yeah, I think this is definitely one of the hallmarks of YA fantasy today, and if you haven't read this yet and you like fantasy, definitely pick this book up because just wow. So after I read all of Throne of Glass, the next book that I got to is To All the Boys I've Loved Before by Jenny Han. After reading heavy fantasy for 2 weeks straight, I needed something light and fluffy and fun to prevent myself from getting in a reading slump, because I think if I read something so amazing in one genre, if I read something similar after, like it's gonna kind of affect my opinion of that book. So when I just love a book so much, I try to read something not as similar right after. So this book follows Lara Jean, who is a 16-year-old girl, and every time she has a really intense crush, she writes a letter to that boy to let them know how she feels about them, and then the letter is a catharsis and she gets over her crush when her letter is done being written, and she stores them in her hat box, never to be sent out. However, one day her letters mysteriously are sent out and her love life goes from imaginary to crazy. This also recently came out as a movie on Netflix, and I read the book and then watched the movie and I absolutely loved it. I gave this book 5 stars. I just thought it was so like cute and fluffy and fun, and I loved Lara Jean's personality, and also just the family dynamics between her and her sisters were really lovely to read about. The movie was fantastic. I love the whole aesthetic of it. Like, the soundtrack is on point, the color scheme, the color palette, her outfits. Lara Jean is a style icon. I don't know, there's just some sort of magic about this book that I just absolutely adored, and I had such a fun time reading this. I actually read this in one straight sitting on the plane, and I just couldn't put it down because it was just so fun. So after I read To All the Boys I've Loved Before, I went on a journey to find the next 2 books, and I'll leave a link to my reading blog where I went to, I think, like 4 different stores to try and find the sequels. It was something, because they were sold out everywhere because the movie's doing so well, and I'm so happy for Jenny Han, and I hope they make a sequel. But I finally got my hands on P.S. I Still Love You, and it's just a continuation of what happens after the fallout from the letters and the things that happened in the first book, so I can't really give too much of a summary. However, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. Just something about the magic from the first book didn't carry over for me into the second book. Like, I still enjoyed it and I thought it was fun, but it just wasn't at that same level as the first book. And I don't know if that's because the movie was so good for the first book that affected my rating of the book, but I was very into the story, and I felt like the continuation just fell a little bit flat for me in terms of the character development for Peter and also John Ambrose McLaren. I felt like John Ambrose McLaren, to me, like, while I liked him, I felt like he was just a very like filler character, and he just seemed like he had just like all these perfect boy tributes, and like that was it. I wouldn't say he was totally one-dimensional, but I just felt like he was just there to serve this purpose, to like kind of serve as a distraction for me. That just kind of like didn't totally sell me on his character. And also with Peter, I don't know if this has to do with having both book Peter and movie Peter in my head. He was doing things in this novel that I just like wasn't a fan of. I also felt like this book didn't get interesting until the last third of it, and maybe it's because the first third of the book is kind of where the movie ends. So like the movie dips into the material from this book, so I kind of like knew what was gonna happen, and then it's kind of boring in the middle, and then at the end things, you know, picked up and were drama filled. But I just don't know if this is my age and the fact that I'm not in high school anymore, and kind of, even though while I like was really relating to the stuff that was happening in the first book, like something about this book just like wasn't vibing with me. Again, I still thought it was cute and I liked it, it just didn't hit that same level for me. Next up, we have Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. My grandma actually gave me this book. I wasn't sure if I was gonna read it, but even though the movie's coming out, and she read it and she absolutely loved it, and she gave it to me, and she's like, Katie, you need to read this and see the movie and let me know what you think, because I think it's fantastic. So my grandma is like the #1 fan of this book series. Rachel Chu thinks she's taking a simple vacation with her boyfriend to visit his family in Singapore, but it is not what she had in mind when she rolls up to the tiny island, and his family is one of the wealthiest families in the world. Soon Rachel is thrust into this world of wealth and status and power, and she must learn to survive with the crazy rich Asians. I ended up giving this book 3.5 stars. I felt like the writing style was a little bit too dense for like the fluffiness of the story. It was very visual and descriptive, so I think that it will work well as a movie. I'm really excited to see the movie, hopefully this weekend. But however, like when I was reading, I just felt like it was like a fun, light, fluffy plot, and then the, you know, like the pacing would be like off or whatever because he'd launched into this description, like an overly descriptive description of like something that was going on, and I don't know, I just felt like it dragged the story a little bit, but I did like the characters and I did think it was an overall fun story. And the other thing for me is I felt like the ending didn't really give it that much resolution. I think that there are a lot of like threads that were left hanging, which is totally fine because there's 2 other books in the series, but for me I would have liked like a little bit more resolution. And finally, the last book I read this month is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. I decided to pick up this book because Tom from TJ Reads the Stars, I will leave his channel information in the description box below, was hosting a read-along and he asked me if I wanted to read this book and I said yes, I would. I read this book junior year of high school, I think, so when I was like 16, 17. So it's been a while since I've read it, but I absolutely loved it. And I mean, after I read it in school, I went out and bought a copy, which I did not do with many school books. That is a testament to how much I like this book. Set in a sleepy southern town in the 1930s, a crisis of conscience rocks the town of Maycomb. Narrated and told from the perspective of Scout, a young girl whose father, Atticus Finch, is appointed to defend Tom Robinson, a black man that is accused of raping a white woman. This story at its roots is really about the human experience and human behavior, things like innocence, experience, kindness, cruelty, love, and hatred, all of that, and it is regarded as a classic, and there's definitely a reason for that because it is just one of the most powerful and beautiful books that I've ever read, and I felt that way in high school, and rereading it now, I feel the same way. I think it is one of the most powerful books that I've ever read, but the way that it all comes together is just so subtle that you don't even realize how powerful it is until you like sit back and think on it for a second and you're like, whoa, like just like some profound things, but told through the lens of a child. So it's almost presented in this simplistic way that a child would understand it. Yet you walk away from the story really, really thinking about the things that are happening. And I mean, the characters are just expertly defined and laid out, and it's just beautiful. And again, like the power of the story, it's not from any one moment that takes your breath away or does anything, but just in the small interactions between the characters and the things that happen in the town, and you walk away with kind of a deeper understanding of humanity. I mean, if you're looking to get into classics, I would definitely recommend picking up To Kill a Mockingbird because I think it's probably one of the best classics that I've ever read. All right, that is all for now. August was a crazy reading month for me. Let me know down below what you read in August. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And yeah, have some fun, read some books, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.